Hello and welcome to Great Minds Motivation. The topic that I will discuss is called youth development. Youth development. This in itself is a concept. A concept is a subject. That is a subject which can be adopted as a school syllabus, or which can be adopted as something which is used along the school syllabuses at school or even at other places as well. It is something which can change lives, have an impact on lives. Hence it is a subject of development. Youth development is a very good subject because it can be taken up at schools, at churches, at universities. This is an audio book called Youth Development. I go straight into the first chapter. The first chapter of this book is called Youth Development is Practical. In life we want things that are practical. Youth development is practical. The best way to develop youth for tomorrow, that is youth that is responsible, is to give them things to do whilst they are still in youth groups, in churches, and whilst they are still at school. The best times being when they are doing their ordinary level and A level and still at university. Youth development is practical. We want to develop youth to be employers. We want to develop youth to be thinkers. We want to develop youth to be responsible. We want to develop youth to be leaders of tomorrow. And hence the development aspect is practical. It is not something that we just discuss as we're discussing right now. It is practical. If we are to develop youth to be leaders of tomorrow in economics, then whilst youth are still at school, it is a good idea to put them into clubs. We can have about 10 clubs in a school, and each group is given assignments. These clubs can be turned into businesses. Club 1 is responsible for making clothes, that is tailoring. Club 2 is responsible for metalwork. These run as a business. Club 3 is responsible for repairing computers. And actually having these youth going out to look for market, to look for customers, or they can advertise for customers. They can even approach big companies. Youth development is practical. Turning youth into entrepreneurs, into employers is practical. It begins whilst they are still at school. It begins whilst they are still youth at churches. The same can be applied at churches. In your church you can have different, they are what are called cell groups in many churches. There can also be cell groups which are in actual fact businesses. Cell 1 up to cell 10 depending on your structure at church. And again you can have cell 1 responsible for bakery, cell 2 responsible for making tissues, cell 3 responsible for buying and selling commodities. Youth development is practical. With this idea, with this concept, we are turning the youth into money spinners. We are turning the youth into responsible citizens, people who won't just wait to be employed or to be given handouts, but people who take the action to change their own lives economically. So I'm saying youth development is practical. Try this in your church. You will see that within your church structure you are going to have businesses that are run by youth, and when these youth retire, that is when they are no longer youths, other youths come in to run those very same businesses. Try this, give it 6 months. If you've got the resources, give it 6 months, you definitely see the results. Don't worry about the failures. Sometimes you've got to fail to succeed. Youth development is practical. The same can be done at universities, at business school. You can have businesses within the university, put in different groups, and hence not only will you turn the economy into an economy of thinkers, drivers, not only will you turn the country into such an economy of thinkers and drivers, but also ultimately the continent, and also ultimately the individual, because here you are training the individual to become self-sustainable, to desist from a syndrome of begging and waiting to be fed, waiting to be looked after. Youth development is practical. It is very, very practical. With this mindset, I give it 6 months to 2 years. You will see changes in your church. You will see changes in your school. You will see changes in the people that come to your church. You will see changes in the people that come to your school. You will see changes in the people that come to your university, until one fine day you can be proud of the results and say, at our school we've got a very